Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to this presentation on the topic of active feedback. Today, you'll be listening to three different presenters. Me, Willie McGuire, a senior lecturer in School of Education. David Nicol, who's a professor in relation to the Teaching Excellence framework. And Gemma Haywood, who is a wonderful GTA and research assistant. Broadly speaking, the aims of the presentation today are, in the first instance, to gauge student perceptions on the effectiveness of an intervention that we devised based on David's work in relation to feedback. And this intervention happened on the Professional Inquiry and Decision-Making course, which is part of the MEd in Professional Practice. Specifically, we were aiming to develop student abilities to generate essentially their own feedback. In other words, feedback on their own work, rather than perhaps through the conventional route of either peers or tutors providing feedback. However, this system still operated within a system where we utilised both peer and tutor feedback.
Okay, my name's David Nicol from the Adam Smith Business School at the University of Glasgow, and I've been leading a project on Teaching Excellence Initiative project there, looking at how to improve students' learning from feedback. And as Willie said, the underpinning idea behind this is that students are already generating their own feedback. When they consult a textbook, when they're doing an assignment, they generate feedback out of that comparison. And in fact, all the feedback that students generate derives from making comparisons. When they get comments from teachers, they must compare those comments against their own work, and they generate feedback out of that comparison. So the students are, in a way, are always agents of their own feedback, but most of the research on feedback focuses on what teachers give them as information. And what we've been researching in the business school and across the university is what feedback students can generate themselves if we give them resources to compare their work against other than comments. And one of these resources is exemplars. Exemplars have an important role to play in this. And then how we can blend this self-generation of feedback with the feedback that they also get from peers and from teachers. So that's the underpinning idea behind it: comparison, inner feedback, and different types of resources. So I'll pass you to Gemma now.
Okay, so for our intervention, 5 areas were selected as the focus for feedback improvements. So one of these was literature search strategies, another literature reviews, ethics applications, research dissemination strategies, and research designs, in particular identifying limitations in their research designs. So we selected these 5 areas as we found in previous cohorts, these have been areas which students have particularly struggled with. Okay, so for the intervention sequence in each of the 5 areas of focus, which I've just discussed, students compared 2 examples of high quality work in the same topic domain. So for example, in the topic domain of ethics, they would then go on to produce their own work in this area. So they were tasked with identifying first what made these 2 pieces of work high quality. And the intention here was to appraise students of what was required in their task and what a good piece of work looked like. So after they'd completed this comparison task, students then produced their own work in that area of focus. And then finally, students compared their findings from the comparisons of the 2 high quality pieces of work with their own work, and they generated their own feedback about how they could make improvements. So during this process, they wrote down what they learned from each of the comparisons in the worksheet. So this made their feedback, their self-generated feedback explicit, and it enhanced their own feedback generation. And it also gives teachers information about what feedback they need to provide.
Over to me. In terms of the methodology that we used with participants to try to determine the effectiveness or otherwise of this intervention, we broadly used a mixed methods approach. In the first instance, we used a couple of focus groups with 6 participants, again looking at the ideas that have just been mentioned by Gemma, considering the effectiveness of making explicit comparisons. And I think the idea of making an explicit comparison here between the 2 exemplars is really the key issue. I think we're used to the use of exemplification. I think that one of the key differences here is in the methodology in which we used in order to make those comparisons explicit. That was what seemed to make the difference. Secondly, we were looking at making comparisons between the exemplars and the students' own work, which put them into a position where they had to transfer learning, if you like, between the exemplars and then their own ongoing work. Second element used as part of our methodology was a survey. And again, it combined empirical methods with some qualitative inquiry, and we were trying to determine, to what extent what's the extent of student learning from the different comparison processes. What did they gain from the comparison between the 2 similar exemplars? And what was what comparison method? What does that provide over receiving peer and teacher feedback? So just to go over that last point, what do they gain from using this comparison method that is kind of over and above what they gain from peer feedback and teacher feedback?
Okay, so in the sample, we had a total of 19 participants, and we first asked them if they compared the 2 examples, and all participants said yes, they did. And then after that, we asked them if they wrote out the results of the comparison. 9 said yes, and 10 said no. Here we were interested in if writing it out made the task more helpful. Okay, so we first of all asked participants what they found helpful. So here you can see a list of items that they ticked if those applied to them. Now there is some overlap in them, but I think this nicely illustrates how helpful the task was to them. So a lot of them ticked that it helped them structure their own work. They found that it helped them see different ways to produce good work. It helped them understand the expectations. It reduced anxiety. It provided a model and a variety of approaches that they could take to the assignment. Okay, and then, as I said before, we were interested in what participants got from writing things out. So here we can see a range of quotes from participants. So some said that it gave them bullet points that they could refer to when they had writer's block. They found that it enabled them to identify key themes and be reflective on their own work and see how they could improve their own work. And what we found really interesting was that they said writing it out got me to think through the actual similarities on a deeper level rather than as just a surface level. So here we can see that writing it out proved really helpful. So this is something that we would recommend going forward.
Okay, in relation to the students using the exemplification to then impact on their own work, 18 of the 19 participants said that yes, they found that to be the case, which we think was a really interesting outcome here. Participants referred back during the production of their own work, what was the key thing that they learned? And very clearly here, the first bar chart indicates that they gained ideas to improve their work that they simply would not have thought of in the first instance. Now, this slide looks at the interrelationship between the use of exemplars and explicit comparison within the use of those exemplars to peer and teacher feedback. And we've got a couple of quotations here to exemplify what the students thought about that. I feel a comparison prior to teacher input is very helpful. It means that when a teacher does intervene, the feedback is much higher quality, more targeted, because you've managed to troubleshoot the majority of the basic mistakes independently. Second question, what do you think the teacher provides that the comparison process does not? And interestingly, the teacher provides reassurance. And also it means that going in the wrong direction is immediately avoided. Second important point here, the teacher can give detailed feedback on my work. Although easy to read exemplars to see where I need to improve, I still need guidance to tell me what I'm missing. I'm a student, I'm still learning, so it'd be a surprise to everyone if I was able to do this without teacher input.
Okay, so to summarize where we've got to so far, I mean, what Willie showed in the last slide is that students can generate a lot of feedback on their own without the teacher, but then it's useful to actually have the teacher there to, to add to to deal with blind spots that the students don't have, because they may not be able to generate their own feedback. But from a perspective of self-regulation, it's important that students have this opportunity to generate it themselves, because this is an empowering thing for them. They see their own feedback capability, and also it helps the teacher to decide what comments to provide, because we're often making a lot of assumptions about what students know and don't know. So when the students hand in their work and they've also generated their own feedback, you're in a better position to decide what you need to provide. One element of this study was that because it was a pilot study in some ways, and we're covering quite a lot of different themes, we made the requirement to make the self-feedback, to write out the self-feedback a voluntary thing. I think in subsequent things, and based on other work I've done in this area, that we really should make the inner feedback that students generate explicit. They need to write something down about it, or to talk about it with someone else, or to update their work based on it, because this makes a big difference. Because we often tell students, go and look at that resource, go and look at that article in a journal. That doesn't mean they generate feedback from it. If we say to them, go and look at that article and compare it with what you've just produced and write down what you learned from that, then it's a feedback generating process. So making it explicit is probably one of the biggest principles behind this whole idea of capitalizing on inner feedback. And then moving beyond this study, we shouldn't always really think that feedback, we need to use exemplars. Exemplars are the only thing that are used as comparators currently in the educational literature. In the business school, we've been investigating the use of non-exemplars. What I mean by that is, for example, let's say you have the students write an application of some ideas or create a case study, and then you give them a theoretical article, a model of the theory behind that, and you ask the students to compare the theoretical article or the theory in the article with the application they've just done, and to identify how they could improve the application based on the theory, or how they could improve the theory based on their experience of the application. This would actually be getting students to generate feedback about theory and its relationship to practice, which underpins all disciplines, education, sociology, mathematics, but we're not using feedback in this explicit way. So in summary, I think that the way forward with all of this is to have students to make resource comparisons and generate feedback out of that against their own work, and then maybe engage them with peer discussion of that so they develop it further. And these students talked about that as well. And then to end load teacher comments. So this teacher is minimizing the other regulation, other people regulating what you're doing. And this helps to deal with the tension in most educational processes where we want students to become independent, self-regulated learners, but we also feel we need to tell them what to do. So by backloading the telling and front-loading students generating their own feedback, we develop a much better way of handling feedback in education. I'll pass you back to Willie now.
Okay, some recommendations. This is an intervention that is really almost inextricably linked with and to practice, because it started off life through a bid gained through small bid funding from the School of Education. And initially, it went towards the production of a CPD resource. I'm calling it here Improving Feedback Literacy. There's a link in the slide. Please feel free to have a look at it. We've also won another small bid, and we intended to improve this existing CPD resource by adding what we've learned from this project to include a full aspect to support students to develop their own ideas in relation to regulating their own feedback. In other words, to try to build what we've learned into this existing resource. Now, this resource is available to you. We can also provide you with a step-by-step guide that was given to Gemma and me from David, which makes the process of using comparison exemplification very, very straightforward. We all use, I think, exemplification to some extent, and the use of exemplification kind of implies comparison. So we're already doing this. If it would help to encourage people to try this out in their own disciplines, please feel free to get in touch. I can provide you with a very straightforward template that would enable you to take this forward. We were kind of very adventurous with this. So it helped students in relation to their practice, but it made the research aspect of the process that little bit more difficult. However, you don't have to do that, and starting small is maybe the way to progress. I'd like to conclude, or the penultimate slide, I think here, with a quotation that I think very appositely sums up what we think are some of the key strengths of this intervention. And I'll read through this very briefly. So the comparison method helps you understand the fundamentals of good work independently. And I think that word independently is absolutely key. It's a real enabler, this process. It's one of the things that I've been most excited about, I think, in the last 20 years in education. And I really, really see it as a way of empowering students, giving choice back to them, really engaging them actively in their own learning, which is the heading for this particular presentation, active feedback. Now, for example, a student here says there are multiple books on how to write a good lit review, but the theory and the action are completely different. And what this person found was that by having to analyse and dissect examples, they were able to structure this over their own work and actually understand it, and that's the key. So although a teacher could tell you what to do, that teacher might not enable you to identify what the student here refers to, the hows and whys. What the student goes on to say is that comparison prior to teacher input is really helpful, because when the teacher does intervene, the majority of the kind of errors have already been removed. So what it means is that the feedback is much more targeted, much more specific, and it also means that the teacher has to troubleshoot far fewer issues, and the student themselves has managed to remove much of the basic mistakes. As a last point, I would like to, from Gemma and I, who are working on the MN programme, express our indebtedness to David with this. It's been an absolute pleasure working with him. And this is, I think, again, something I would really, really strongly encourage people to try out, even if it's on a small scale. Honestly, it really makes a difference. I'll leave you finally with some key literature and website connections on the last slide. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you from all of us. Please get in touch if you would like any more information. You could get in touch with either me or David. We'd both be happy to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.